lost, but one of them, Politico says, is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that? Sorry.
Greg Gutfeld doesn't believe in warm-ups or slow burns when he targets someone like Tim Walz. It's an instant detonation. It's no setup, no subtle jabs, just a full-blown verbal inferno lit with gasoline, sarcasm, and that signature Gutfeld smirk. And when the governor of Minnesota handed him a goldmine of material, from disastrous policies to public meltdowns and political flip-flops, Greg didn't hesitate. He came in swinging, sleeves rolled up, armed with punchlines and precision, like a man who had been counting down to this roast since breakfast.
Now, Walz is weird, but he disguises it under the costume of phony compassion, a fake politician who masks destructive ideas under the guise of empathy. At a 2017 town hall, he implied 10-year-old boys should be able to invade girls' bathrooms because it's all about...
First, Greg went straight for the branding, and he didn't miss. Tim Walz had tried to wrap himself in the cozy image of middle America, as if tossing on a flannel shirt and tweeting about tractors somehow made him the second coming of Lincoln with Wi-Fi. But Gutfeld wasn't buying it for a second. With surgical precision and his trademark sarcasm, Gutfeld shredded that down-earth everyman act. He mocked the idea that Walz could win hearts by name-dropping farmers in speeches or posing next to a tractor like it was campaign cosplay. The audience didn't just laugh, they howled, because Gutfeld made it crystal clear. A flannel shirt doesn't make you relatable when your policies are completely out of touch.
Since his only attack was that the other guy was weird. Because everyone is weird, the more you get to know them. It's why marriage is a commitment. Over time, both spouses realize we're all bat crazy. But there's weird and there's dangerously insane.
Greg made it brutally clear. In his eyes, Tim Walz's idea of hard work was less about real leadership and more about figuring out how to stretch a 5-minute press conference into a TED. Just talk about absolutely nothing and just... When the crowd thought it couldn't get any sharper, Greg took them straight back to the chaos of the pandemic. He dove headfirst into Walz's handling of lockdowns, its mandates, and what he generously referred to as Minnesota's slow crawl. Through common sense, with biting humor, Greg painted Walz as a leader who flip-flopped so often. He looked like a cat trying to land on both sides of the fence at once, confused, cautious, and completely lost in his own contradictions. It wasn't just a roast, it was a public reckoning.
If you ever want to know what the Dems are up to, just listen to what they accuse you of doing. Take the word weird. It was first uttered by a guy named Tim Walz, directed at another guy called J.D. Vance. But turns out, as usual, it's a preemptive projection. For the Dems always call you on stuff that they're about to do or have already done. They accuse you of election interference before they do it. They accuse you of racism before they do it. They accuse you of censorship right before they try to shut you up.
One day it was stay home, stay safe, and the next it was open up. But not too much. And only if the wind's blowing southwest. Greg Gutfeld couldn't resist. He joked that Tim Walz must have been consulting a magic 8-ball for his COVID policies and getting his public health advice straight from a horoscope. Greg had an absolute field day with the chaos. He shredded the inconsistencies and pointed out the double standards that popped up during Walz's leadership, like weeds in a forgotten parking lot. Whether it was the ever-shifting rules or the selective enforcement, Gutfeld made it clear. This wasn't leadership. It was political improv, with a dash of confusion and a heavy dose of hypocrisy.
Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face, you know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrifying threat to democracy that Trump is, not a single interviewer in his history has approached him with trepidation? If anything, they come at him, often with brutal questions about lawsuits, about affairs. Everything is on the...
Greg didn't hold back when he lit into Walz's COVID hypocrisy. He pointed out the absurdity of mom-and-pop shops being forced to shutter, while big-box stores stayed wide open, as if the virus had some strange respect for fluorescent lights. And discounted patio furniture. That's Minnesota science, Gutfeld joked, where germs take one look at a Target aisle and call it a day. But it wasn't just the policies, it was the panic. Greg took gleeful aim at Walz's press conferences, comparing them to dramatic readings of post-apocalyptic fiction. With every vague phrase like "we're at a tipping point," Gutfeld translated the political code. "We have no clue what's going on, but doesn't this sound serious?" He even joked that if Walz ever voiced a GPS, every route would end in a U-turn and a nervous apology. Then came the riots, the summer inferno that rocked Minnesota. Its neighborhoods burned and stores were looted live on TV. Greg slammed Walz for his deer-in-the-headlights hesitation. He mocked the governor's sluggish response, saying Walz looked like a student who didn't study and was praying the teacher forgot about the quiz. And his refusal to immediately deploy the National Guard? Gutfeld roasted him as a man waiting for input from his dog, a houseplant, and a group chat full of passive-aggressive consultants. It was pure satire meet scorched earth commentary, and Walz was the punchline.
But whose expertise does he rely upon for his Midwestern takes? Here's Minnesota State Rep. Leigh Finke, who wants to train more children's doctors on sex change surgery and puberty blockers. He sponsored the Trans Refuge Bill, which Walz signed, which makes Minnesota a sanctuary state for such butchery.
If you promise trans refuge, then we need to increase the number of people who are offering gender.
Gutfeld tore into the delay, saying Walz only stepped in after the fire department had packed up and gone home. It wasn't decisive action. It was leadership by rearview mirror, always reacting late, but somehow with a press release. Pre-written and ready to spin, the damage was done, and Greg made sure the audience knew it. Tim Walz wasn't leading. He was sweeping up political debris in slow motion. Then came the economy, and Greg couldn't resist. He skewered Walz's tax policies as a buffet of bad ideas where confusion was the main course and job flight came as a free side dish. He joked that if you played a drinking game and took a shot every time a business left Minnesota under Walz, you'd need a new liver by lunchtime. And his economic strategy? Gutfeld said it looked like throwing darts at a board while blindfolded and spinning in circles. Except the board's on fire and the darts are being taxed. Then Greg lit up the education system like it was open mic night. He reminded everyone that Walz, a former teacher, somehow managed to oversee a school system that performed worse than a spam email from a Nigerian prince. Test scores tanked, graduation rates stalled, and teachers were trapped between meaningless mandates and lesson plans written by consultants who hadn't seen a classroom. Since chalk was cutting-edge tech, Gutfeld didn't hold back. Under Tim Walz, he said, the only thing students in Minnesota were learning fast was how not to learn.
There are other weird things about Walz, of course. He fibs about his military service. He set up a snitch line to narc on citizens for not wearing masks outside. And he's super weird on free speech.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
There's no guarantee. What? I guess his class didn't cover the First Amendment. But if misinformation...
But Greg Gutfeld didn't just roast the policies or the painfully indecisive leadership. He torched the image. The whole awkward, over-rehearsed, try-hard attempt at relatability. Gutfeld mocked Tim Walz's working-class dad persona, saying, he didn't look like a grounded leader. He looked like a substitute teacher who got lost trying to find the break room. From the rolled-up sleeves to the exaggerated empathy and stiff grins, Greg said it felt less like authenticity, and more like a high school play, where the lead actor forgot his lines, but kept going anyway because he'd already memorized the hand gestures. And then came the takedown of the performative politics Walz's endless parade of listening sessions where no one listened. Town halls that solved absolutely nothing, and task forces that produced more headlines than real results. Greg said Walz spent more time managing optics than outcomes, which is perfectly fine if you're starring on a reality show. But for someone running a state, that's a recipe for disaster. As for those press conferences, Greg described them as lectures disguised as updates, where Walz would talk for 20 minutes and say absolutely nothing. all while wearing the expression of a man who just realized he left the oven on halfway through a sentence.
You lost because you weren't woke enough? That's like telling Joy Behar she's not eating enough Doritos. That's like Jasmine Crockett saying, I gotta black this up. That's like Bud Light saying, hey, you know what? We could use more Dylan Mulvaney. But even Kamala's not that clueless, and that's saying something. Walz also seemed to doubt the validity of the last election.
Gutfeld joked that watching a Tim Walz press briefing was like trying to read IKEA instructions printed in invisible ink, long, confusing, and ultimately useless. But here's the kicker. Greg didn't need to exaggerate a single thing. The material was already so outrageous, all he had to do was hold up a mirror, cue the laugh track, and let the absurdity speak for itself. This wasn't an angry rant, it was a precision roast. No yelling, no red-faced fury, just a smug grin and a perfectly timed punchline. And that's what made it land so hard. Greg wasn't outraged, was entertained. The brilliance of the roast was that Gutfeld didn't try to paint. Walz is dangerous, he made him look ridiculous. And in politics, that's worse. Because, while voters might eventually forgive a tyrant, they never forget a clown. Walz wasn't just being criticized, he was being turned into a recurring punchline on national TV. And the best part? Greg left the door wide open, knowing Walz would absolutely give him more material, whether it's a new half-baked executive, order a dramatic pause in a speech that goes nowhere, or a press release stuffed with empty buzzwords and no substance. Greg Gutfeld knows this comedy goldmine isn't closing anytime soon. The show, as they say, is far from over.
Quote, as a teacher, my number one responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child in that room. These are children my son's age, a 4th grader, a 10-year-old, who just wants to go to the bathroom. And their identity is they are male or female, and they just go in that bathroom and use it. End quote. Sounds so folksy, you know? Belongingness. Yeah, they'll be belonging in therapy with this guy at the helm.
Tim Walz wasn't just roasted, he was filleted, seasoned, and served up hot with a side of Minnesota nice and a double helping of common sense smackdown. Greg Gutfeld didn't just go after the man, he dismantled the myth. He held up Walz's carefully crafted image like it was under a microscope and exposed it for what it was. A scrapbook of flattering headlines held together with duct tape, buzzwords and pure wishful thinking. And just when it seemed like Greg had hit his peak, he cranked it up again, launching a second wave of takedowns, this time with surgical precision and zero mercy. The target. Walz's obsession with commissions, councils, and endless advisory boards. Gutfeld couldn't stop laughing at the irony, a governor who built a bloated bureaucracy of people whose full-time jobs seemed to be doing absolutely nothing. Tim Walz hands out task forces the way Oprah hands out free cars, Greg said. You get a board, you get a council, everybody gets a committee. But while Oprah delivers joy, Walz's panels delivered PowerPoint slides, vague reports and results that sounded like horoscopes written by sleepy interns. And just when the laughter peaked, boom, Greg dropped the final bomb. Minnesota's rising crime wave. And how Walz's response was less law and order and more send thoughts and form another subcommittee. It was a comedic demolition, and Walz never saw it coming.
What is with this administration and the spouse swapping of the VP and the president? We saw it before. Like, Dr. Jill didn't kiss Joe like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And now he couldn't wait to get that full embrace. It wasn't a bro hug, it was a yo hug. And he put his wife in the friend zone.
Yes.
Which is always, that must have been a fun car ride home.
Yeah.
Why can't you hug me like her husband? I mean, it's weird.
It is weird. You know, Joey, I think that it's okay to take Walz's picadillos, if you call it, apart, because remember, he broke the seal by calling Vance weird, and we're all weird, including him.
Greg absolutely unloaded on Walz's bizarre Fantasyland politics, especially when it came to crime. as store windows were boarded up and neighborhoods transformed into mini fortresses with motion sensors and panic buttons. Walz still stood in front of cameras, insisting that everything was getting better. Gutfeld couldn't help but laugh and roast. He compared Walz to a firefighter standing in front of a burning house, telling everyone, "Don't worry, this is just part of our new neighborhood spa package." The absurdity was so rich it practically wrote itself. It didn't stop there. Greg pointed out how Walz seemed to treat criminals not as threats, but as misunderstood motivational speakers who just needed a hug and a second chance. Reducing penalties while scratching his head about rising fear, Greg tore into it. "It's not complicated," he said. "If you keep petting a bear and calling it a misunderstood raccoon, don't be shocked when your picnic basket vanishes and your tent looks like it fought in a war." Then came infrastructure, and Greg had a field day. Said Minnesota's roads under Walz didn't just look rough. They looked like they'd been bombed by toddlers with jackhammers. It wasn't just neglect, it was a demolition. Project disguised as urban planning. According to Greg, you don't drive in Minnesota anymore. You off-road in a Toyota Camry and pray for survival. And yet somehow, that still wasn't the worst of it.
The ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is.
Greg didn't just torch Walz's policies. He went after the awkward theater of the man himself. He zeroed in on the bizarre, tone-deaf PR stunts that tried to pass off manufactured empathy as real leadership. You know the kind? Speeches that begin with heavy sighs and dramatic pauses, only to end with hollow phrases like "we're doing everything we can," while the actual results say otherwise. Gutfeld compared it to watching a bad actor audition for the role of concerned leader, except the script is outdated and the audience isn't buying it anymore. Then came the real roast. Greg said Walz's attempts to blend in with working-class Minnesotans felt like Undercover Boss, Governor Edition, except the disguise was a flannel shirt and an uncomfortable grin. His version of empathy. Gutfeld didn't hold back. "It's like watching an AI try to learn human emotions by binge-watching soap operas," he joked. "And the communication style? A train wreck?" Greg said listening to Walz talk was like watching someone try to defuse a bomb using IKEA instructions written in Braille while blindfolded. Everything is over-explained, painfully vague, and laced with enough corporate buzzwords to launch a startup retreat in a cornfield. It wasn't just bad leadership. It was performance art with a nervous smile.
I want to see this in slow motion. You'll see Walz extends his hand to his wife. She grabs it. They shake. He pulls her close and then goes in for that non-friction hug, all the while still shaking her hand. I wish there was a word to describe that. Oh, yeah.
Greg absolutely unleashed in what might have been his most savage jab of the night, joking that if you played a drinking game every time, Tim. Walz said phrases like robust dialogue or community-centered approach. He'd be legally unconscious before the Q&A even started. He painted Walz's speeches as bingo cards of bureaucratic nonsense, where buzzwords replaced actual solutions and nothing meaningful ever got done. The crowd was howling, and Greg wasn't even close to done. Then came the brutal prediction. If Walz gets re-elected, brace for more programs, more pointless boards, and even more catchy slogans slapped on lawn signs like they're branding a new breakfast cereal. Greg described a dystopian Minnesota where every bad idea gets a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Every committee comes with catered brunch, and the governor is too busy scheduling equity workshops to notice the roof literally caving in, and the audience ate it up. Because when Gutfeld roasts, it's not just a joke, it's a public service. He says what everyone else is thinking, but can't say out loud, not because they're wrong, but because they're afraid of being too honest. Greg, he doesn't flinch, just laughs, points at the absurdity, and reminds us all that the emperor might have a PR team, but he still forgot his pants.